Have you ever finished praying, said salam, stood up from the prayer mat and still felt completely alone? It is 11:47 at night. Your phone is beside you. There are dozens of contacts, a few unread messages, perhaps hundreds of people who could reach you in seconds. And yet, somewhere inside, there is a sentence you would never say out loud. Nobody is really thinking about me. You make dua, you pray, you recite Quran, you know Allah is near. And still the question returns, if Allah is near, why do I still feel so alone? Ibn Arabi would not begin by shaming that question. He would begin by examining what you mean by alone. Because in his understanding of prayer, Salah is not simply something you perform toward Allah. It is an intimate conversation between the servant and the real. And when Ibn Arabi turns his attention to the Tashahhud, he notices something that can completely change how you understand spiritual loneliness. You do not finish your prayer speaking only as an isolated individual. You say, "Peace be upon us and upon the righteous servants of Allah." Why us? Who exactly is included in that word? And why does Ibn Arabi connect those righteous servants with a reality much wider than the small circle of people we usually imagine? By the end of this video, you will understand why that one word may be addressing one of the deepest forms of loneliness you carry, and how to pray those familiar words differently tonight. Because the sentence that may change your understanding of loneliness is one you have probably been saying for years, without realizing what Ibn Arabi saw inside it. First, we are going to look at why you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Then we will look at what Ibn Arabi believed prayer actually does to the heart when it becomes a real conversation with Allah. Then we will slow down inside the Tashahhud itself and examine the strange moment when you say, "Peace be upon us and upon the righteous servants of Allah." Then we will see why Ibn Arabi believed this sentence reaches far beyond the person sitting on your prayer mat. And finally, we will turn all of this into 3 simple practices you can use tonight, so that the next time loneliness comes, you do not automatically interpret it as abandonment. We are not going to pretend loneliness is imaginary. We are going to ask a more difficult question. What if the pain is real, but the meaning you have attached to the pain is wrong? Think of a person sitting at a crowded dinner table. Family members are talking. Someone is laughing. Someone is checking their phone. Plates are moving across the table. And this person smiles at the right moments. Nobody notices that they feel completely outside the room. Now compare that with someone sitting alone after Fajr, beside an open window, hearing almost nothing except the morning air. That person may be physically alone and yet feel strangely peaceful. This is the first distinction we need. Physical solitude is not the same thing as existential loneliness. You can be alone without feeling abandoned, and you can be surrounded by people while feeling completely unseen. Modern psychology has a useful way of describing part of this. Social baseline theory proposes that human beings ordinarily function with social relationships as important resources for regulating threat and effort. When those relational resources become less available, the cognitive and physiological burden of dealing with the world can increase. But notice the boundary. Science can describe why human beings are deeply structured around relationship. It cannot tell you that Allah is simply another psychological relationship. Islam makes a much larger claim. Ibn Arabi asks, what happens when the heart understands its relationship with the one upon whom every created relationship ultimately depends? And this is where Ibn Arabi becomes especially interesting. He was not simply a poet speaking vaguely about spirituality. He was a jurist, theologian, metaphysician, and mystic, whose Futuhat al-Makkiyah repeatedly brings outward religious practice and inward transformation together. In his discussion of prayer, Ibn Arabi describes Salah as a conversation. He draws on the famous Hadith Qudsi, in which Allah describes the prayer as divided between himself and his servant, with the servant's recitation receiving a divine response. He also describes prayer as a light that cuts through preoccupation and gathers the servant into an extraordinary intimacy with the real. So our path today is simple. Salah becomes conversation. Conversation becomes presence. Presence transforms the heart. And then, near the end of the prayer, the Tashahhud introduces a word that quietly breaks the illusion that your relationship with Allah is an isolated private experience. That word is us. And that is where our first flaw begins. Imagine Aisha. She is 34. She works remotely. All day she speaks to people through screens. Meetings, messages, voice notes, family conversations, notifications. If you asked her whether she has people in her life, she would say yes. But at night, when everything becomes quiet, another thought appears. Nobody is really thinking about me. Notice how precise that wound is. She is not saying, I have no friends. She is saying, I am not present in anyone's heart. That is different. Because the heart does not only want company. It wants to know that its existence matters somewhere. Have you felt this? You send a message and wait. You notice someone viewed your story but did not respond. You see other people gathering without you. You watch somebody else receive the affection, attention, invitation, or recognition you secretly wanted. And slowly the mind turns an event into an identity. They did not contact me becomes they do not think about me. Then, they do not think about me becomes I am forgettable. And finally, I am forgettable becomes I am alone. This is where Ibn Arabi's understanding of prayer interrupts the chain. In his discussion of Salah in the Futuhat, Ibn Arabi emphasizes the extraordinary intimacy of the servant's conversation with Allah. He describes prayer as a place where ordinary preoccupations fall away, and where the servant addresses the Lord directly. Think about what that means. You entered prayer carrying a social question. Who remembers me? Who notices me? Who cares? Who would miss me? But the prayer does not answer by giving you a list of people. It takes you somewhere deeper. Before you became visible to people, you were already known to Allah. Before anyone understood your personality, Allah knew your inward reality. Before anyone could recognize your pain, Allah knew it. And before you ever learned how to explain yourself, you were already completely exposed before the one who created you. Being unseen by people is not the same as being unknown to Allah. Let that distinction settle. Because there is a dangerous habit hidden inside loneliness. We begin using human attention as evidence that we exist. Someone remembers our birthday, and we feel significant. Someone forgets it, and significance collapses. Someone asks how we are, and we feel held. Someone does not ask, and suddenly we feel abandoned. Our emotional state becomes a scoreboard. Who called? Who replied? Who noticed? Who invited me? Who praised me? Who remembered? And the heart starts demanding witnesses. But Allah's knowledge of you is not merely emotional reassurance. He does not notice you in the fragile human sense. He knows you. The distinction is enormous. Human beings discover one another gradually. Allah does not discover you. There is no moment in which Allah suddenly realizes that you are hurting. There is no moment in which your existence becomes more real because someone else finally recognized it. And this changes how you approach prayer. You are not walking onto the prayer mat to convince Allah that you exist. You are walking onto the prayer mat before the one who already knows. Science describes the mechanism. Ibn Arabi tells you where to redirect the heart, and here is where this becomes uncomfortable. Suppose you have spent years trying to cure loneliness by becoming more visible. You improve your appearance, you become more interesting, you answer faster, you post more. You become useful, you become impressive, and sometimes you even become spiritually impressive. You want people to think, she has depth, he has iman, she is close to Allah, he is different. But the wound underneath can remain exactly the same. I need to be seen. The costume changes, the hunger does not. This is why the answer cannot simply be get more attention. You need people, you need family, you need friendship, you need mercy, affection, companionship, and community. Islam does not ask you to become emotionally detached from human beings. The problem begins when human recognition becomes the foundation underneath your sense of worth. Then, every silence becomes rejection. Every distance becomes abandonment. Every unanswered message becomes a verdict. And every lonely night becomes evidence that something is wrong with your life. But prayer offers another interpretation. The room may be quiet. The phone may remain silent. The person you wanted may not call, and still, you are not unknown. You are not outside divine knowledge. You are not spiritually erased. The lonely heart keeps asking, who is thinking about me? Prayer teaches it to ask a different question. Before anyone thought about me, who already knew me? That is not the end of loneliness. It is the beginning of understanding it. Being unseen by people is not the same as being unknown to Allah. But Ibn Arabi goes further than simply telling you that Allah sees you. The next question is far more surprising. If your prayer is intimate with Allah, why does the Tashahhud suddenly make you say us? Imagine Omar. He is 41. He has just argued with his wife. Nothing dramatic, no betrayal, no catastrophe. Just the ordinary accumulation of two tired people misunderstanding one another. He walks toward prayer, carrying the argument inside him. He stands. He bows. He prostrates. His forehead touches the ground, but his mind is still replaying the conversation. Then he sits for Tashahhud, and he says the words he has said thousands of times. Peace be upon us, and upon the righteous servants of Allah. And suddenly one word becomes strange. Us, who is us? Why am I saying us when I feel completely alone? That question opens a door, because Ibn Arabi does not treat the phrase concerning the righteous servants of Allah as a decorative sentence. Dennis Grill's study, published by the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, specifically discusses Ibn Arabi's interpretation of this Tashahhud formula. Ibn Arabi expands the meaning of the righteous servants beyond the narrow category of people we ordinarily call saints, connecting it with the universal praise of God by creation. This is one of the most important safeguards for our entire discussion. We are not saying Ibn Arabi discovered a secret code hidden in Arabic grammar. We are not saying every human being is automatically spiritually perfect. We are not saying Tashahhud is secretly teaching that every person has the same spiritual station. His point is subtler. Servanthood before Allah is larger than the small categories by which human beings divide one another. The phrase says, peace be upon us, and upon the righteous servants of Allah. The worshipper's inner world suddenly becomes larger. You began with yourself, your worries, your marriage, your loneliness, your unanswered questions, your private grief. But the tongue says, us. Then, the servants of Allah. Your prayer is personal, but it is not isolated. Think of a single voice entering a vast cathedral. The voice is still one voice, but the architecture changes what the voice means. The sound enters a space larger than the speaker. The Tashahhud does something similar to the spiritual imagination. You are still you. Your pain remains yours. Your story remains yours. But you are not the entire story. This matters because loneliness often contains a hidden sentence. Nobody could possibly understand what I am experiencing. Sometimes that sentence is true at the human level. There are experiences nobody else can enter completely. There are griefs that remain partly private. There are fears you cannot explain. There are wounds you can describe for an hour and still feel that the listener only understands the outline. But there is another danger. The heart begins turning its incompleteness into isolation. I am the only one. My pain is uniquely mine. Nobody else could possibly know. And then the world becomes divided into me and everyone else. The Tashahhud interrupts that division. Peace be upon us. Not merely me. Us, and then the righteous servants of Allah. Now think about what happens when you compare yourself with other believers. Someone else gets married. Someone else has children. Someone else buys the house you wanted. Someone else's career moves forward. Someone else's dua appears to be answered immediately. Someone else's life seems full of people. And you look at your own life and think, why not me? Comparison turns other servants into competitors. But the Tashahhud trains your tongue toward another relationship. Not, they have what I don't. But, they too are servants. This does not erase envy by pretending you do not feel it. It gives the heart somewhere else to stand. This is the part most Islamic content never reaches. The spiritual life is not only about what you say about Allah. It changes how you imagine yourself among His creation. The person sitting beside you in the mosque is no longer merely another face. The believer grieving somewhere in another country is not merely a distant stranger. The elderly woman praying alone before dawn is not outside your spiritual world. The young man struggling with a sin nobody knows about is not outside the mercy you hope for yourself. The righteous servant becomes a category larger than your social circle. And Ibn Arabi's interpretation goes even further. The Ibn Arabi Society's presentation of his commentary connects this phrase with the idea that creation itself participates in praise of God. He invokes the Quranic truth that there is nothing that does not glorify Allah through His praise. Now the word us becomes almost cosmic. You are praying inside a world that is already turned toward Allah. The trees do not need your permission to glorify Him. The heavens do not wait for human approval. Creation is not spiritually silent simply because you cannot hear its language. The Quran says that everything in the heavens and earth glorifies Allah, although human beings do not comprehend their glorification. So your loneliness may be telling you, I am one isolated consciousness in a silent universe. The Quranic imagination says something completely different. You are one servant inside a creation already praising its Lord. And then the Tashahhud places that reality onto your tongue. Us, have you ever considered how strange that is? You do not say, peace be upon me. You say, peace be upon us. The lonely heart wants to reduce everything to me. The Tashahhud expands the circle. The lonely heart says, my pain. The prayer teaches, our servanthood. The lonely heart says, nobody understands me. The prayer answers, you are not the only servant standing before Allah. You were never created to carry existence as though you were the only soul in it. The Tashahhud teaches the lonely heart to stop saying me to everything. But that is only half of what Ibn Arabi is saying. Because even after you discover that you belong to something larger, another problem remains. What if you are still desperately trying to manufacture the feeling of Allah's presence? Imagine Mariam. She is 29. She has watched dozens of videos about khushu. She has read explanations about concentration in prayer. She knows that prayer should transform the heart. So now she monitors herself. Am I focused? Am I feeling something? Is my heart soft? Did I experience presence? Was that prayer good enough? She bows and evaluates the bow. She recites and evaluates the recitation. She reaches Tashahhud and evaluates the Tashahhud. She is praying, but she is also watching herself pray. Have you ever done this? You finish Salah and immediately inspect your internal state. Why didn't I feel anything? I was distracted. My heart wasn't there. Maybe my iman is weak. And now, worship has become another performance. Ibn Arabi's discussion of prayer gives us another way to understand this. He describes prayer as conversation and emphasizes that prayer cuts through preoccupation. He also describes the inner dimension of remembrance and the way the servant's attention can become gathered toward Allah. The crucial shift is this: you do not manufacture divine presence, you become attentive to it. Think of a radio. You are not creating the broadcast. The signal is already being transmitted. Your problem is static. Noise, interference, mental commentary. Fear, memory, desire, self-consciousness. The receiver does not need to invent the signal. It needs to become less dominated by noise. This is one reason Dhikr matters so much in Ibn Arabi's framework. Remembrance is not merely repetition for the sake of repetition. It is reorientation. It is returning the heart to its proper reference point. And this is where muraqabah becomes useful. Muraqabah means sustained attentiveness before Allah. But do not misunderstand it. It is not sitting there anxiously asking, "Am I spiritual yet?" It is not another form of self-surveillance. There is a world of difference between watching yourself and watching your heart before Allah. One keeps you trapped inside yourself. The other turns you toward Him. Modern psychology has a related but limited observation. Excessive self-focused attention can interfere with direct engagement because the person begins monitoring their own performance instead of remaining immersed in the activity itself. But again, science describes one mechanism. Ibn Arabi gives you the spiritual direction. Stop making yourself the object of every moment. You are praying. Pray, you are reciting. Recite, you are remembering Allah. Remember, do not stand outside yourself holding a clipboard and grading your soul. And now we reach something much deeper. The deepest form of loneliness may not be, "Nobody is with me." It may be, "I cannot remain with myself unless someone else validates me." That is a very different wound. Because now the heart has become dependent upon witnesses. Someone must see your beauty. Someone must admire your intelligence. Someone must appreciate your sacrifice. Someone must recognize your pain. Someone must understand your spirituality. And if nobody does, you feel unreal. This can even happen in religious life. You may secretly want people to know that you are sincere. You want them to know how much you care. You want them to notice your knowledge. You want them to see your patience. You want them to recognize your spiritual depth. And suddenly the desire to be understood has become another desire to be seen. The nafs has simply changed its costume. It has not changed its nature. This is why Ibn Arabi's understanding of servanthood is such an important safeguard. You are not asked to become spiritually impressive. You are asked to become a servant. Ubudiyya means that your relationship with Allah does not depend on constructing an impressive version of yourself. The servant does not need to become extraordinary before approaching the Lord. The servant comes as a servant. Distracted, weak, tired, confused, hopeful, ashamed, grateful, human. And perhaps that is why your loneliness can become useful without being romanticized. It exposes the places where you have been demanding witnesses. It reveals how much of your identity depends on being recognized. And prayer quietly asks, can you stand before Allah without performing yourself? Can you speak without trying to sound spiritual? Can you remember without demanding a feeling? Can you sit in Tashahhud without asking whether the experience is impressive enough? You do not have to manufacture presence. You have to become quiet enough to receive the moment you are already inside. You do not have to manufacture the presence of Allah. You have to become quiet enough to notice it. Most people stop here and say, then prayer will cure loneliness. Ibn Arabi's insight is more mature than that. Prayer does not promise to remove every human absence. It changes what that absence means. Imagine Yusuf. He is 57. His children live in different cities. His house is quieter now. His wife has passed away. After Isha, there are no long conversations in the next room. No one asks, how was your day? No familiar footsteps. No ordinary disagreement about what to eat. The loneliness is real, and we need to say that clearly. Islam does not require Yusuf to pretend otherwise. He does not need to smile and say, I am not lonely because Allah is enough. That sentence can become spiritually dishonest when it is used to deny genuine human grief. He misses his wife. He misses conversation. He misses being needed. He misses ordinary companionship. Prayer does not have to erase those facts. He stands for Isha, and when he reaches Tashahhud, something changes. Not necessarily his emotion. The house is still quiet. His children are still far away. The chair beside him is still empty, but the meaning of the emptiness changes. He no longer concludes, I am abandoned. He can say, I am alone right now. Those are not the same sentence. This distinction is enormous. Ibn Arabi's prayer teaching brings us back to intimate conversation with Allah. He describes prayer as a light and as a moment in which the servant enters an extraordinary direct relationship with the real. His Tashahhud interpretation then widens the field. The servant speaks of us, and of Allah's righteous servants, and Ibn Arabi connects this wider reality with the universal praise of creation. So put the pieces together. You are seen by Allah. You belong to a wider reality of servanthood. You do not need to manufacture divine presence. Therefore, loneliness can be experienced without becoming your identity. This is the crucial distinction. I am lonely describes an experience. I am abandoned turns the experience into a theology. The first can be true, the second can be false. You can miss someone without believing Allah has left you. You can want companionship without believing your life is meaningless without it. You can grieve a relationship without concluding that your entire existence has become empty. And you can desire to be understood without demanding that another human being understand every corner of you. This is spiritual maturity. It does not deny human attachment. It puts human attachment in its proper place. Think of a tree. From above the ground, one branch may look completely isolated. It extends into empty space. It may be surrounded by nothing, but underneath the soil, it belongs to a root system. The branch is still individual, it is still distinct. It is not less itself, it is simply not self-sufficient. That is the spiritual picture. You remain a person, a spouse, a parent, a friend, a son, a daughter, a neighbor, an individual servant with a private story. But you are not spiritually self-contained. Your existence is rooted in a relationship with the one who gives existence. This is why the goal is not to replace people with spirituality. That would be another distortion. You should call your friend, visit your parents, sit with your children, repair your marriage. Build community. Ask someone how they are. Allow yourself to be loved. Allow yourself to need people, but do not make human beings carry the burden of being your ultimate source of security. No spouse can be awake every moment. No friend can understand every wound. No child can fill every silence. No community can remove every insecurity. And no human being can know you completely. When you demand that from them, even love becomes pressure. But when Allah becomes the deepest reference point, human relationships become freer. You can love without possessing. You can miss without collapsing. You can receive affection without worshipping it. You can experience rejection without turning it into a final verdict on your worth. And you can sit alone without deciding that the universe has become empty. Prayer does not promise that Yusuf will never cry again. It teaches him that his tears do not prove abandonment. That is a very different kind of healing. The lonely person does not necessarily need a permanent feeling of companionship. Sometimes they need a truer interpretation of solitude. The question changes from, how do I make someone stay? To, how do I remain faithful when someone cannot stay? That is servanthood, that is ubudiyya. And that is why prayer can transform loneliness, without pretending loneliness does not exist. Prayer does not promise that you will never be alone, it teaches you what aloneness means. But now we reach the deepest paradox of all. The prayer in which you become alone with Allah may be precisely the prayer that teaches you that you were never spiritually alone. Think of a person who has spent years trying to escape silence. Whenever the room becomes quiet, the phone comes out. Whenever nobody is speaking, music starts. Whenever nobody is available, social media opens. The silence feels threatening. But then, one night, that person stands in prayer. And something strange happens. Prayer removes the distractions. Ibn Arabi says prayer cuts through preoccupation and gathers the servant into an intimate conversation with Allah. So in one sense, prayer makes you more alone. But then the Tashahhud arrives. Peace be upon us, and suddenly the prayer that made you alone with Allah reminds you of us and the righteous servants of Allah. This seems contradictory, it is not. Prayer first deconstructs false companionship. Then it restores true belonging. You discover, I do not need the entire world to be psychologically present for me to be held by Allah. And then, because I belong to Allah, I am not spiritually cut off from His servants. Ibn Arabi's interpretation of the Tashahhud becomes especially powerful here, because he connects the righteous servants with the wider reality of creation praising Allah. The Ibn Arabi Society cites his explanation that all servants are, in a certain sense, included in this reality of divine care and praise. Now listen carefully. The answer to loneliness is not, find someone who completely understands you. No human being can carry that burden perfectly. The deeper answer is, know which kind of loneliness only Allah can heal, and stop demanding that human beings heal it completely. That does not make relationships less valuable, it makes them more honest. You no longer ask your spouse to be your entire world. You no longer ask your friend to understand every hidden layer. You no longer ask your community to validate your existence. You love them as servants. You receive them as gifts. You grieve when they leave. You remain grateful when they stay. But you do not confuse the gift with the giver. That is the paradox. The more securely the heart belongs to Allah, the more freely it can love people without demanding that they become its God. You do not overcome loneliness by making everyone come closer. Sometimes you overcome it by discovering who was never absent. And now we bring this out of theory. Because if Ibn Arabi's reading of the Tashahhud changes anything, it should change the way you sit in prayer tonight. Think of yourself tonight, not an imaginary person. You, the same room, the same prayer mat, the same words you have repeated for years. But this time, do 3 things. First, practice the one-sentence Tashahhud. When you reach, "Peace be upon us and upon the righteous servants of Allah," do not rush past us. Ask silently, who am I including in this word? Include yourself. Include the believers you know. Include believers who are grieving. Include people struggling with sins you know nothing about. Include people you will never meet. And remember the Ibn Arabi insight. The phrase points toward a reality of servanthood much wider than the small category of people you personally recognize as spiritually exceptional. Your loneliness says, "My life." The Tashahhud gently widens it, our servanthood. Second, practice the no-performance Tashahhud. For one prayer tonight, stop checking whether you feel spiritual enough. Do not ask, "Is my heart soft? Am I experiencing something? Was that presence good enough?" Simply attend. Let the words be words. Let your heart listen. Ibn Arabi's discussion of prayer as conversation gives you permission to stop treating Salah as a performance you must impress yourself with. Prayer is an encounter in which the servant addresses Allah. Third, practice the loneliness translation. Before sleeping, write, "I feel lonely because." Finish the sentence, honestly. Then write, "What I am actually longing for is." And finally, what part of this belongs to people, and what part belongs only to Allah? For example, I feel lonely because nobody checked on me. What are you actually longing for? To feel remembered. People can remember you, but only Allah can be the ultimate source of being known. This separates the event from the interpretation and the deeper longing. You are not trying to eliminate loneliness. You are learning to translate it. I feel lonely becomes, my heart is asking for connection. Then you ask, what connection can a human being provide? And what connection can only Allah provide? That question alone can change the way you enter prayer. Do not run from the loneliness. Do not worship the loneliness. Listen to it. Then take it somewhere higher. Do not ask loneliness to disappear. Ask it what your heart has mistaken for absence. And now, go back with me to where we started. It is 11:47 p.m. The phone is still beside the bed. There are still unread messages. Perhaps nobody has called. The room is still quiet. Nothing external has magically changed. But something inside you has changed. Earlier the sentence was, "Nobody is thinking about me." Now you can say, "My value was never created by being thought about." Earlier, "I am alone." Now, "I am experiencing aloneness, but I am not abandoned." Earlier, "Nobody understands me." Now, "There are parts of my heart that only Allah fully knows." And the next time you stand in prayer, the Tashahhud will not have to remain background language. You will sit. You will testify. You will send peace. And then you will say, "Peace be upon us," and perhaps, for the first time, you will pause over that word. Us, not because your human loneliness was imaginary. Not because you no longer need people. Not because prayer guarantees that nobody will ever leave you. But because you now understand something deeper. Your prayer is personal. But you were never spiritually isolated. Ibn Arabi's reading of the Tashahhud opens that word toward the wider reality of Allah's servants and the universal praise of creation. The loneliness may remain for a moment. The room may remain quiet. The message may never arrive. But once you know who is with you, loneliness no longer has the authority to define you. You may still be alone, but you no longer have to mistake aloneness for abandonment. And when you say peace be upon us in your next Tashahhud, who will you finally realize you have been including in that us?